As Craig said, my name is John Shier, and I work as a researcher in the office of the CTO at Sophos. And last year I was up here talking about the dark web and how you could gather the necessary resources, tools, and skills to basically become a cyber criminal. And during that talk, I made a passing remark at how there's this fascinating story on some darknet markets and how they got taken down, but I didn't really have the time to tell that story. So this year, thanks to you guys and your votes, I get to tell that story. So what we're going to talk about today is just that, is how law enforcement goes about taking down some of these darknet markets, and we're going to specifically look at the AlphaBay and Hansa takedowns. We're also going to look at the fate of Dream Market, which is currently the biggest drug marketplace as well as other illegal stuff marketplace around there. And we're going to talk a little bit about, how these markets work and why they get taken down from time to time, and generally talk about some OPSEC failures which inevitably, take these guys down. And one of the things we're not going to talk about, though, is just the sort of morals and ethics of these markets. Morals are subjective, and we may not agree on the details, but the fact remains that what these markets are providing are goods and services that are considered illegal in most countries, and so that's why law enforcement takes them down. So before we get to the main event, the fun stuff, we got to talk a little bit about some history, and we got to talk about Silk Road. And if you turn on your clicker, then it works. So Silk Road, many of you probably remember this as one of the first sort of massively popular dark web markets out there, the really successful one. And this was founded in 2011 by Ross Ulbricht. And Silk Road was meant to be an expression of the theory of, or the philosophy of agorism and counter-economics. And it wasn't the first darknet market, but it was the first one to really gain massive popularity amongst the people, the denizens of the dark web. And it kind of helped guide the way that many of the future darknet markets would evolve and emerge and be coded from then on. For example, it was an early adopter of things like escrow payment systems and also vendor reputation systems. One notable aspect of Silk Road was the fact that it had a policy that the goods and services that were sold on the site had to not pose any harm or defraud people. This applied to things like child pornography, obviously, services based on violence, or other goods used to aid and abet things like carding and stolen identity. So things aiding and abetting fraud, essentially. It wasn't always the case. Some stuff snuck in every once in a while, but that's at least what were in the terms of service. And in keeping with that libertarian ethos, most of what you could buy on Silk Road were things like drugs and drug paraphernalia. Now, there weren't only illegal goods on this market. There were actually some legal ones, too. There were things like jewelry and books and artwork and sporting goods, as well as war memorabilia and some replicas. Now, according to some, Silk Road contributed to the rise in value of Bitcoin at the time. Prior to Silk Road, there were markets like the farmers market, which actually took payments and processed transactions using PayPal and Western Union, which ultimately led to their downfall. But because of Silk Road and the huge transactional volume that was getting processed through the site, some people think that that really helped pump up the price of Bitcoin at that time. And when Silk Road was seized on 2 October 2013, there was a profound, albeit temporary, dip in the price of Bitcoin, which is represented by the line over here in the price on the right-hand axis. So, that market really was an integral part of the Bitcoin economy at the time, and it wasn't long before a lot of other people noticed what was going on with Silk Road and wanted to get in on the action. So in about mid-2013, we started seeing a lot more of these markets start to open up. The second thing we need to talk about is how these darknet markets operate. Right? Some of the markets that are around today still follow that original sort of libertarian ethos of Silk Road of do no harm to others, and they only trade in things like drugs and drug paraphernalia. But the majority of the most popular markets out there today will sell just about anything to anybody. So drugs, weapons, hacking services, malware, counterfeit goods, you name it. The only thing that most of these markets still prohibit are things like child sexual exploitation material and sometimes murder. So as we can see from Government Exhibit 113A from Ulbricht's trial, this was entered by the prosecution, this is pretty much how all darknet markets still operate today. It's basically a supply and demand equation with a facilitator in the middle. So the vendors get on the site, they would put ads on the site for whatever they want you to buy, drugs, guns, whatever it is. And as a user, you would browse that site, and then eventually, if you find a product that you like, you would create a demand order or a buy order. First thing you need to do, obviously, is take your real money and turn it into fake money, and then deposit that into your market account. Once the buy request has been initiated, the funds then go into escrow and are held there until the buyer acknowledges receipt of those goods and services. Once the buyer acknowledges receipt, the funds are then released to the vendor, and the market will take a cut of the proceeds. So generally, they take around a 2 to 6% commission, somewhere in there, for the market. And that's how these guys basically make their money today. There are other ways to make money too. So these are the rules for opening a vendor account on the AlphaBay clone Empire market, which is currently in operation today. And there's the usual rules on here about, not doxing other people, no child pornography or murder, no selling outside the market. But what these guys have done is they've also instituted a $300 bond for being a vendor on the site. And this is a non-refundable bond. So they're trying to keep some of the scammers off the site at this point. They also treat security very seriously, so you have to have a PGP key if you're going to be on this site, and you have to have two-factor authentication. It's mandatory for all users. Now imagine if Facebook had these kinds of terms of services, right? Here's the rules for a relatively new market called Nightmare Market. We see many of the same rules as Empire Market. As a matter of fact, some of the stuff is very much copy and paste. But these guys only charge a $250 bond, which is refundable after 3 months if no scam reports and 100% fair deal. So basically, if you're a good vendor and everybody's happy, you get your $250 back. But the number one rule is there will be no shenanigans against Russian citizens. As a matter of fact, they feel so adamant about this that they felt the need to mention it twice. So I wonder where those guys are from. And there's some other creative ways as well that some of these markets try to make money. This is from Empire Market, and they run a weekly lottery that for the low price of $1 US, which is of course payable in bitcoins, you get a chance to win the jackpot. And 6 correct numbers right now will get you around $8,000 US, depending on the price of bitcoins. But they also have, as you can see here, the win class and basically the numbers that you need to win and the payout. It goes down. And if they say in the rules that if you get all 6 numbers and nobody gets 5, then you get the combination of both pots. So you could stand to win a lot of money. So it's another way that these markets kind of find creative ways to generate some money. All right. So why do these darknet markets get shut down? Why do they come and go? So this eye chart is a chart tracking 87 different markets over the course of 6 years. So the colored bars indicate the longevity of the market, while the color indicates why the market went down. So at the very top, we see Silk Road 1, which is coded in green, which means that it was taken down by law enforcement. Right below that, we have Black Market Reloaded, which is coded in gold, which allegedly suffered a hack and they were forced to shut down. There's still a little bit of contention over that one, but at least that's what they say happened. Below that in blue, we have the sheep marketplace, which exit scammed. Now, an exit scam is when the administrators of the market basically take whatever's in escrow at the time and just take off with it. And so depending on the size of the market and the popularity and the amount of transactions, that could be quite a haul. Now, in the case of sheep market, they made off with about $6 million. Below that, the next green line that I've highlighted here is Silk Road 2. So Silk Road 2 was opened by a former administrator of Silk Road 1. And he wanted to use the same name because, it was popular, it was a catchy name, and everybody knew it, so he wanted to trade on that name. But he wasn't in operation for very long before it too was shut down by law enforcement. Next is, the pinky purple lines. These markets, that signifies a market that was shut down voluntarily. Meaning the admins in this case, instead of exit scamming, what they did is they told their community, we're shutting down for whatever reason. Maybe law enforcement was getting hot on their heels. We're shutting down, and they gave people time to withdraw the money that was in their accounts so nobody lost any money. And then finally, we've got Evolution down here, which also exit scammed to the tune of $12 million. At the time, Evolution and Agora were 2 of the biggest markets on the dark web. But just like nature, the criminal underground abhors a vacuum, and so when those markets went away, there was a need for another market to take its place. And that's the moment that AlphaBay came into the picture. In the 3 days following Evolution's seizure and shutdown, AlphaBay gained 18,000 members and was soon trading around $300,000 per day. AlphaBay was like many of the newer markets. It dealt in drugs, but you could get all sorts of other things like malware, some hacking services. You can get things like British Airways Air Miles accounts. You could get yourself some luxury goods like these Yeezys. Now, I never knew what a Yeezy was before I started doing this talk, but a trainer really wasn't what came to mind at first. But because of the explosive growth of this market, it drew a lot of law enforcement attention. And this was really one market that needed to be shut down, due in large part to just to the massive amounts of drugs that were processed and moving through this market at the time that it was around. And especially things like fentanyl, which were being sold on this market. So at this point, the cops took notice and they went to work. There were mentions all over the site about this, that it was founded and designed and maintained by this Alpha02. And Alpha02 also did an interview with Deep.Web, a news site, where he admitted to being the site's founder. So now the cops, at least they had a target, at least they had a moniker, right? But they really didn't know who that was in real life. So what they did is they started buying drugs. So they bought some marijuana and some heroin and some more heroin and some more marijuana and 50 grams of meth just for good measure. Then they bought some driver's licenses and they bought an automated an ATM skimming device, but nothing really came of it. What they were trying to see is if they could gain some clues as to, the way that things were delivered or processed, if they could get some identities. It wasn't until they decided to register an account on the discussion forums, most of these markets have a discussion forum, that they caught a break. One of the features of the sign-up process was that a user had to provide an email for password recovery purposes. The system would then send an automated email, and buried in that header was this address, pimpalex91@hotmail.com. So naturally, the feds called up Microsoft and said, who owns that address? And it turned out that it was a Canadian by the name of Alexandre Caz, whose birth date was 19 October 1991. If we look at his LinkedIn profile, which was associated with the same email address, we see that he was a software designer based in Quebec and that he worked at EBX Technologies. Now, the feds later learned that this was a company that he owned and controlled. EBX Technologies was really nothing to talk about. It wasn't very profitable. It wasn't particularly productive if you looked at their statements. It was simply a company that Caz used to launder the money from AlphaBay so that he could get it out into the real world. They also found mentions of both the 91 Hotmail account and another email account associated with EBX Technologies, associated with a PayPal account. So now they're starting to piece together these things, right? Little OPSEC leak here and there leads to getting a better and broader picture of who this person was. Further digging led to this post from a French computer help forum by a user calling himself Alpha02. Now, this might have been a coincidence if it weren't for the fact that the post was signed Alexandre Caz with his email address of hotmail.com. Now, the post has actually since been edited to remove that piece of information for whatever reason. And if you take that email address and you stick it in Have I Been Pwned, it shows up all over the place, including obviously in LinkedIn and some very notable things like exploit.in, which is an underground forum for trading exploits and malware, and 000 web host, which is a known repository for shady scripts. Ironically, in that Deep.Web interview, the interviewer asked if he, was afraid of getting caught, and actually Alpha02 here is bragging that he thinks his OPSEC is secure and he lives in an offshore country where he's safe. So, the feds had their man. They knew who this guy was. They now had to set their trap. Around the same time as AlphaBay was around, there was another market that was getting a lot of attention both by the user of the site and by law enforcement. Like AlphaBay and many of the other markets at the time, it dealt with all sorts of illegal things, goods and services, including drugs, counterfeit items, digital accounts, you name it. Then one day in late 2016, a security researcher found something interesting. They found a server on the clear web that appeared to be a development server for the Hansa Market platform. The researcher notified the Dutch police since the server was being hosted at a data center in the Netherlands. The Dutch High-Tech Crimes Unit, or the HTCU, quickly got a warrant to install some network monitoring equipment to spy on the traffic going to and from that development server just to see what it was communicating with. To their astonishment and surprise, they found that that server was communicating, was very chatty and was communicating with another set of servers in the same data center that happened to be running Hansa's live site. They were also communicating with another pair of servers in Germany at another data center. So the HTCU immediately made a copy of all the hard drives of these machines so that they could analyze what was going on in there, and they got it, basically by doing that, they got every single transaction on record that had been processed through Hansa Market, as well as all the chat logs for the encrypted messaging system. Now, since all the chat logs, all the chats used pseudonyms, we didn't, you couldn't really map one-to-one the person that was speaking with an actual real-life identity. But the Hansa admins had made a huge OPSEC mistake yet again. If you look way back in the history of the chat logs, down near the bottom, both admins' names appeared in clear text, as well as the home address of one of those admins. And both of them were German nationals. So when the Dutch police approached the Germans to say, hey, we need to get these guys arrested and extradited, it turns out that the German police was already on the case and already had these guys on their radar. It turns out they were running another site that was selling, it was called lul.to, that was selling pirated ebooks, audiobooks, and MP3s. So the Dutch police kind of had an idea here. They thought, well, maybe we can use the arrest of these guys for this as a cover for our other operation. And everything was kind of ready to go. And when the Dutch were ready to set their trap, everything went dark. The assumption is that the Hansa admins had noticed the hard drive copy, panicked, and moved the servers to a different Tor-protected location. The HTCU had nothing to go on anymore, and now it was really just back to analyzing all those logs and those images to see if they could find yet another clue. Luck was on their side again in April 2017 when they found a Bitcoin wallet address buried in one of those chat logs. It turns out that Bitcoin address, and in using some blockchain analysis, it turns out that they found that a payment was made out of a payment processor in the Netherlands. So they were able to go over there with a warrant and say, give us some information. The information they got was that the payment was made to a hosting company in Lithuania. And again, with another warrant in hand and a little bit of multilateral cooperation, they found the Hansa servers once again. That's the actual server in the server rack. So it wasn't too long after this second break that the FBI notified the HTCU that they too had found some interesting servers, namely the servers hosting the AlphaBay infrastructure, and they were planning to take them down. So this gave the Dutch another idea. They said, well, if AlphaBay goes down, users would, as have happened so many times, they would flock somewhere else. And the likely source or the likely destination for that would be Hansa. So on 20 June in 2017, the Dutch police sent some officers to Lithuania, to the data center, while the German police went to arrest the two gentlemen in Germany. Now, they waited until they could see that there was actual admin traffic going on the network, because they were obviously monitoring it. And when they were sure the two guys were at the keyboard, the German police swooped in and arrested the two German nationals while their computers were online, unlocked, and unencrypted. Now, in that carefully coordinated raid, they also phoned up the Dutch police who were in Lithuania, and they immediately started imaging those servers over to some servers that they controlled back in the Netherlands. Under questioning by German police, the two guys just basically gave up everything and gave up all the passwords, all the keys to everything. Effectively, because of this operation and the way they did it, the swiftness and the way that the secrecy that they did it under, there was no downtime. Nobody noticed a thing, and Hansa just kept running as usual. So with all the pieces in place now, this is when Operation Bayonet was born. This was an operation that involved multilateral cooperation between the Americans, the Canadians, the Dutch, the Germans, and a bunch of other law enforcement agencies around the world. On 5 July 2017, the FBI, with the help of the Canadian authorities and the Thai authorities, shut down AlphaBay. The Canadian authorities went to the data center where the servers were being hosted. It was in Montreal, and they started taking down these servers. And the Thai police arrested Kaz at one of his luxury homes in Bangkok. What the Thai police did is this is his home. What the Thai police did is they took an unmarked car and brought it down the street, and then they staged an accident. They banged into his gate, pretending to turn the car around. Then some other undercover officers came running out, pretending to be neighbors and causing a ruckus and yelling, and they're trying to draw this guy out, right? And because they knew he was online, because obviously they were monitoring his traffic. And so he didn't come out. So they, kept moving the car, kept banging into his gate, kept making more ruckus, and eventually he came out. He had a phone in his hand. He was wearing, just trainers and shorts and no shirt. And that's when the cops swooped in. He kind of tried to run away, but he didn't make it too far. They tackled him and put him in handcuffs and grabbed his phone right away to make sure it didn't lock. And when they went inside his house, his computer was logged into AlphaBay servers and unlocked, and the police were able to seize everything. The reason he was on his computer was because his servers were going down, and he was trying to figure out what was happening. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, the Dutch police had been fiddling with the code of the Hansa market. They rewrote the site's code so that passwords were no longer being stored as hashes, but in plain text instead. They also made a small tweak to the messaging system so that before messages got encrypted, there was a copy of them that was made in plain text, and this got them a lot of the buyers' home addresses. They removed a feature that stripped out metadata from product photos as they were being uploaded into the market. And so that basically could get them some things like geolocation coordinates, hopefully. They actually staged a really interesting server glitch where they said, all our photos are gone. You need to re-upload all your product photos. And they were able to actually grab 50 dealers that way. And then finally, they also tricked some of the sellers into downloading a backup file, which is a booby-trap Excel file, that when the sellers opened that file, it would phone home and reveal the user's real IP addresses. And that got them another 64 targets. So shutting down AlphaBay had the desired effect. More than 5,000 users were registering on Hansa every single day. A week later, though, once the news broke officially that AlphaBay had been seized by the police, the influx of users was so large that the police actually had to shut down registrations temporarily because they just couldn't deal with it anymore. And unfortunately for the Dutch cops, and Dutch law states that you had to track every single transaction and report that to Europol. And this was becoming just a massive nightmare and paperwork headache for these guys. So after only about 27 days, they had to shut down the operation because at that point, there was about 1,000 transactions a day that were going through the Hansa market. So imagine doing paperwork 1,000 times a day. It's not fun. So they shut down the site and pulled the plug on Hansa. And the results were pretty staggering. The police had obtained data on 420,000 users, including 100,000 home addresses, which they later turned over to Europol, and a few, I believe they call them knock-in talks, where police show up at your door and say, hey, I think you bought something. You might want to rethink that in the future. And they distributed these home addresses worldwide to some of the other police agencies. And they also seized around $12 million worth of Bitcoin, which were currently sitting in the escrow accounts. By the time it was seized, AlphaBay had over 370,000 listings on its site, over 400,000 members, and was trading anywhere from $600,000 to $800,000 per day. Just for comparison, in its heyday, Silk Road only had 13,000 listings. So a massive improvement, I guess, if you will, over the older markets. And it's estimated that AlphaBay, over its very short lifetime of roughly 2 years, grossed around $1 billion. Now, Alex was living the good life. The forfeiture document, when he was arrested, lists several luxury properties, including this villa in Phuket in Thailand. You could actually rent this villa for a period of time, before he was arrested. Now, when you go to these rental agencies, it just says it's unavailable. But But he had a whole bunch of other properties as well. He was what you call an economic citizen. He would buy properties in certain countries where if you spent enough money on real estate or development, they would then offer you citizenship. So he had a citizenship with Antigua because he bought a $400,000 beachfront property, and then he was in the process of getting a property in Cyprus for the same reason. So in Cyprus, if you spend over 2 million euros, then you get economic citizenship as well. If he had been at my talk last year, he would have learned that if you stay out of the blue countries, you don't get extradited to the United States. But unfortunately, all his properties, and he lived in Thailand, and all of his assets were in extradition available countries. There was also 10 luxury cars, including this lovely Lamborghini Aventador LP700, and his personal net worth was estimated to be around $23 million. So he made a lot of money. Unfortunately, the good news of AlphaBay was somewhat tainted. While awaiting for extradition to the U.S. in Thai jail, he hung himself in his Bangkok jail cell rather than face the long arm of the law in the U.S. So with AlphaBay gone and Hansa gone, it was Dream's turn to inherit the spotlight. By all accounts, Dream had inherited all what they call the refugees from these markets, and it basically emerged as the number one leading market of the time. And back in March, when I began putting together this talk, at least the pitch for this talk, I was kind of doing my regular rounds on the dark web, and I saw this notice. This was big news. No one had a clue what was going on. There were wild rumors and speculation on many forums saying that Speedstepper, the owner and operator of the site, had either been arrested or exit scammed. Many people still vouched for him and said, don't worry about it. He's okay. He's just taking a break, whatever. Everything will be okay. But, the rumor mill starts to turn and things start to, conspiracy theories start to take hold. And curiously, unlike most of the messages that are from administrators, this one was not signed. And that's usually a big red flag on the dark web if you're not signing your messages as an admin or just even as a user. So during this time, the site stayed up, but you just couldn't buy any product. There was no product listings anymore, just this notice, and it said, 4/30/2019, we're going down and transferring to a partner market. Now, apparently you could still withdraw your Bitcoins at this time, which meant that users could, if they wanted to liquidate their accounts, they could, but apparently there was some problems with that as well. And if you were on the forums, people were all panicking, and then the rumors of exit scams started all over again, and it was a lot of fun to read. 30 April came and went, and the site was still up, still showing the same banner. Then in early May, a post on Dreadit, which is kind of like the dark web's equivalent of Reddit, attempted to set the record straight. It turns out that Dream had been on the receiving end of a sustained 7-week DDoS attack, and the attackers were demanding a $400,000 ransom. Now, DDoS attacks on the Tor network are nothing new. They're quite common, actually, and markets like this are very often the target just because of the profile that they occupy. And DDoS attacks are also kind of systemic. There's actually issues with the protocol that make them really successful and really possible. And so it seems instead of giving up what Speedstepper or whomever is behind this particular market decided to do was just shut it down and maybe, start coding from scratch, or at least what they're saying is they're trying to improve the site's code, maybe make it more DDoS resilient, maybe add some new features, and they're going to relaunch bigger and better than before. Shortly after, this notice appeared on the market. So now instead of saying they're moving to a partner market, they're saying they're going to reopen in August with new infrastructure. And an accompanying post on Reddit confirmed the same thing. As of this week, the Dream mirrors have all gone offline, and the true fate of the site is still unknown. So here I am with an unfinished talk and wondering what to do. And that's when law enforcement stepped in to give me a hand. Along with Dream Market, Wall Street Market, and Valhalla were a couple of other large and well-trafficked sites. On the morning of 2 May, I woke up to this notice. The German police had seized Wall Street Market, and Finnish customs and French police had seized Valhalla. This again rocked the Darknet community, and there was panic in the proverbial dark web streets. The forums got really exciting on that day. And then only 5 days later, because they didn't want to be left out of the fun, the FBI seized the extremely popular dark web news site deep.web. So it was easy to understand why Wall Street and Valhalla went down, but why deep.web? Those of you who might have been here last year might recall that deep.web was not only a news site, but also, amongst other things, a portal to Darknet markets. On the sidebar here, you can see a bunch of popular markets that are highlighted, as well as their availability. It also had some referral links for all of these markets. And this was the bridge between the clear web and the dark web. But it still doesn't explain why the site was shut down, which left a lot of us kind of scratching our heads. As part of their press release, the FBI published this handy infographic, which basically explained why all of this was illegal. So it turns out that the deep.web admins would create an account on one of these markets. When you create an account, you get a referral link. They would take that referral link, publish it on deep.web, and then promote the site. Now, anybody who wanted to go to one of these markets and found them, let's say, through deep.web, and a lot of people did, when they opened their account, they would use that referral link. From that day forward, every single purchase that user made would be a cut of the purchase would actually go to the deep.web admins. And from there, they would take the money, and this is in perpetuity, they would take that money and then they would subsequently launder it through some shell companies. And the indictment, we see that deep.web's referral link was actually responsible for nearly 24% of all AlphaBay transactions and 47% of all Hansa transactions. The admins received over $15 million in kickbacks from the various darknet markets that they promoted. I believe most law enforcement agencies call these proceeds of crime. I also believe this is the first time that a website, a bust has occurred of a website, a ClearNet site, that only contained referral links. And what was also interesting is there were a few other sites around at the time when these guys got busted that have since just disappeared off the internet. So, like many of their predecessors, a slew of OPSEC mistakes were really to blame for the takedowns of Wall Street and deep.web. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any public information on the busts of Valhalla, but I'm willing to bet a few pints of bitter that an OPSEC fail was probably very central to that bust as well. It doesn't take much to take down your criminal world. The deep.web indictment identified Tal Prihar and Michael Phan as the admins behind deep.web. Tal Prihar is listed as the owner on his LinkedIn profile as the owner of OTSR BizTech and M&M Marketing, and Michael Phan as the owner of Jazz Coffee Trade Limited. So the cops, by watching these sites, knew who the shell companies were, and by doing just a simple bit of, open source intelligence, they were able to start piecing these things together and gather who the real life identities were of the deep.web admins. As a matter of fact, if you looked at Michael Phan's Facebook profile, you can see up here that he was also the owner of M&T Marketing. So, starting with some shell companies and following the money led the authorities to the real life identities of deep.web admins. That's all it took. Another good example is the story of a senior Dream Market admin who was arrested in the U.S. on his way to a beard growing competition. Oxy Monster was a prominent member of the Dream community as well as a forum admin and vendor. His identity was pieced together by analyzing the public Instagram and Twitter posts of a guy by the name of Gal Valerius, and comparing those posts to other posts that were made on Dream forums by Oxy Monster. Another really helpful tidbit was they were able to link this Dream key here with Oxy Monster and further link it to Gal Valerius as well. So this is what one of these tip jar Bitcoin wallet. A tip jar basically on the darknet market is just if you want to tip the admins a couple shekels for being a satisfied customer, you could do that. But they were able to tie this Bitcoin address not only with Oxy Monster but with the real life identity of Gal Valerius. So on 31 August of 2017, he was detained and questioned in Atlanta on his way to Texas to the beer growing competition. And the indictment indicates that they found the login credentials to Dream Market, as well as a PGP encryption key titled Oxy Monster. It's like these guys have never heard of Tails. Gal Valerius was tried and subsequently sentenced and found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison for distributing drugs, and is now serving his time in federal prison. I think he got a little bit of time off for clemency. He probably ratted out some of the other admins as well. It was a pretty sick beard, though. As of April this year, Wall Street Market was one of the largest darknet markets out there. It had over 5,400 vendors, over a million customers. It was one of the many places where you could get yourself some Donald Trump ecstasy, as well as all sorts of other illegal goods and services. And like all other markets, it generated money by taking a cut of each transaction. In this case, anywhere from 2 to 5%, depending on the vendor's status and or rating. And aside from the obvious reasons for why this would get law enforcement attention, they were also allegedly tied to a real-life death of a resident of Florida because he ordered a fentanyl-laced nasal spray off of Wall Street Market. Wall Street Market was also the successor of German Plaza Market, which exit scammed in 2016. So again, by using blockchain analysis, the federal agents were able to follow the money and establish that the money from the wallets associated with German Plaza Market were being used to fund the operation of Wall Street Market. Now, since the busts are relatively new, we don't have all the details yet, but reading through some of these indictments can kind of give us some clues as to how the three men behind Wall Street were identified. The police discovered several servers thought to be those belonging to Wall Street, imaged them, and then started analyzing those images for clues. There weren't any immediate smoking guns, but the cops were able to get some pseudonyms from the code and from the databases and all sorts of other things that would later be associated with the defendants. If you're going to use a pseudonym, don't reuse that pseudonym on the clear web. It's that simple. The authorities were also able to analyze some of the network traffic coming in and out of those servers while they were monitoring them. And in this case, one of the defendant's VPN services betrayed him when it shut down unexpectedly on him while he was actively using the WSM or administrating the WSM infrastructure, thus revealing and unmasking his real-world IP address. It turns out that that IP address was tied to one of those mobile UMTS sticks that was registered to a broadband company in Germany under a fictitious name. And by using additional monitoring of that IP address and some geolocation of the stick itself, they found that the stick was being used not only at his place of work, but also at his residence in Germany. Another guy registered his VPN service in the name of his mother. That was nice and easy. That admin later admitted to all charges and his complicity as being an administrator of Wall Street Market. Now, meanwhile, the analysis of the images kept going, and they turned up a bunch of PGP keys. It was found that some of those PGP keys and some of the other keys that they found were associated with wallets that were used to pay for some digital marketing services for Wall Street Market. These guys do advertise, after all. A lot of them advertised on deep.web, as a matter of fact. And one of these PGP keys was also found to be associated with a wallet of a Hansa user. And because the cops had all the Hansa stuff, they were able to dig through that and find some additional information. And then further blockchain analysis of all the wallets that were found in the infrastructure indicated that the other wallets were, that wallet and the other wallets were also associated with this Martin Frost and this email address. So basically this guy was opening wallets all over the place and opening accounts for, on gaming sites and other places using the same email address. So again, if you're going to be a criminal, don't be stupid. Use a different email address. What makes the WSM case even more interesting is the fact that the three admins were actively planning an exit scam. In late April, this message appeared on the site. I happened to just stumble upon it just by accident. I was like, oh, maintenance, I'll check back in a couple days. Apparently, they were going to go down for maintenance and they were going to be back, shortly. The site never came up. The feds, because they were watching this, noticed that these guys were planning an exit scam and decided to actually, push up their seizure a little bit earlier than planned. So law enforcement noticed, but so did a bunch of other people. On Reddit, there was a post that happened shortly after that saying, like it goes without saying, Wall Street's exit scamming. So get your stuff out now. And there's also this mention down here of Ellie having the IP address to the admin panel. So what was that about? Well, shortly after the site went into maintenance, another interesting post appeared on Reddit. It seemed like somebody had just leaked the admin panel URI and a username and password for the Wall Street Market admin panel. So who could have done this and why? So this is where things get interesting again, and we start looking at a big bucket of OPSEC fail now. So if we look at this username here, Medellin, I guess he wants to be a big-time drug dealer, we find this indictment for Marcos Paulo de Oliveira Anibali, also known as Medellin or Medellin WSM. For a while, Reddit used to actually allow subreddits of Darknet marketplaces, and this bottom AKA here was the pseudonym or the moniker that this person used to speak with people on the market, because he was a representative of Wall Street Market, answer questions, settle disputes, whatever the case may be. And he spoke fluent English and Portuguese, and he actually interacted with the Dutch police on Hansa. When he noticed that AlphaBay went down on 5 July, on 10 July, he actually contacted the administrators of Hansa and said, hey, you're probably going to get an influx of users. You could need some help. Can I have a job? And so they started questioning about his skills and what he could offer. And because he was a community manager for WSM and had been in this game for a little while, he said, I've got some experience with moderating disputes and dispute resolution and support. I also have some experience with Bitcoin trading, Bitcoin exchanges. I have a little bit of coding experience, but I'm willing to do anything. You guys, you're a trusted market. You're going to need the help. I feel like I want to be part of this and help you guys, have the best market around. Little did he know he was actually talking to the Dutch police at the time. And they kept stringing him along, and they eventually asked him for his home address. They said they were going to send him a security token. And he said, well, I live in Brazil. OPSEC mistake. I live in Brazil, and the post here is really slow, and it'll take like 60 days before it gets to me, and the key will probably expire, so don't bother doing that. And they kept pressing the issue, and finally he relented and gave them an address in the city of Campinas in the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil. It was registered. And what he said was it was one of his drop addresses, right? So a drop address is basically, if you're ordering illegal things, it's kind of good to have a drop address. This is where the goods arrive. You either pick them up from there, it's not your home residence, or you have somebody there who's an accomplice of yours that's going to forward those packages on to you later on. And most of these are often registered under fake names or under other people's names. But he registered this address under Marcos Paulo. So, not a good idea. And then I found this in the indictment, which I thought was pretty interesting. Please don't send the cops to this address. You guys, I trust you guys because Hansa's always been good. Don't do any bad joke. I've had this drop for a long time, and I don't want it lost. So what the federal agents did is they took that address, they took the name Marcos Paulo, they gave it to the DA agents in Sao Paulo, and they returned the full name of the person who was actually registered behind that address. That wasn't the only OPSEC fails this guy made. This Medellin was all over the place. There was an about.me profile that stated he was a student, small business owner, and consultant in Campinas, Brazil. So again, we've got a location here. Visit my website. This went to marcosanibali.com. If you went there, there was a QR code with a Bitcoin wallet address. There's a PGP key in here, a keybase.io profile, this Onion address, which no longer is in operation, a GitHub profile, and a Twitter profile. The GitHub profile was to a username by the name of Coins of Pixel, and the Twitter account was for Darknet Citizen. Now, the Twitter account has since been shut down, but the GitHub profile is still up. Now, he wasn't a very prolific GitHub contributor, but, you start piecing these things together, you can get a better idea of who these people are. Here's his Bitcoin address. It was sort of pseudo-personalized. So now we know that, it's probably a good bet that this one Marcos blah, 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 blah is probably Marcos Anibali, seeing as we found that on marcosanibali.com. His Reddit profile used the same name as his Twitter profile, Darknet Citizen, and here's his keybase proof. Again, further tying his name to his real life name. If you go to MSDN, you see a profile for Marcos Annibale with a website of coinsofpixel.com. If you go to the Whois records for coinsofpixel.com, you find it was registered to a Marcos Annibale in Campinas, Brazil. And he also had a Flickr profile by the name of Darknet Citizen and a Discuss profile by the name of Marcos Annibale. That wasn't just it. There were digital crumbs all over the place for this guy. He had multiple email addresses, but he kept reusing them over and over and mixing them between his clear web and his dark web presence. They pulled his employment records and found that he was a customer feedback supervisor for Paxful, a company that did Bitcoin trading, which kind of makes sense, right? This was his skill. He makes sure communication loop between users and developers is constantly improving. He was a community manager for a real company. And what was really interesting is if we look over here at this book, this is a book by Robert Saviano called Gomorrah. While the feds were analyzing the WSM chat logs, they stumbled on one chat where Marcos had posted a message saying, I love Robert Saviano's work. Have you read, I think it's 000 is one of these books. Another user said, yeah, I've read that book. Have you read Gomorrah? And he said, yeah, I have it. It's a great book and I like the movie too. And then, of course, the obligatory, password dump, right? So Marcos Annibale, one of his email addresses in Brazil, and a very super elite password. All right, so where does that leave us? Where do we stand now? A bunch of these markets have gone down. There's good news and there's bad news, right? The good news is a lot of the drug pushers, specifically the ones pushing dangerous drugs like fentanyl, are being taken off the street, and a lot of these markets are shutting down. The bad news is there's always going to be another one. It's a game of whack-a-mole. These markets come back up, and very often they learn from past mistakes, and they become stronger than ever. As a matter of fact, right now, Empire Market and Nightmare Market are kind of the two biggies on the street. There's a couple other minor players, but those are the two that are seeing a lot of traffic right now. And bad OPSEC will always bring you down. Whether you're a cyber criminal or just a private citizen looking to stay private, remember, if you're going to have dual identities, don't mix them. It's true for good people. It's true for bad people. So I hope you found that somewhat entertaining. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference.